3 days before Father's Day, my daughter called and said, "Dad, don't come this year. Mom's new husband will be there, and everyone's trying to make him feel like part of the family." So I spent the day alone and drove off with nowhere to go. A few hours later, I found myself standing in the middle of a disaster no one else had seen coming. By nightfall, my name was everywhere. Just after midnight, my daughter called again, but this time her voice wasn't surprised. It was shaking. "Dad, please, you have to come. We need you right now. Before we go further, thank you for being here. It genuinely means the world to me. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? Your city, your country. I want to know who's in this room with me on Grandpa's Stories." A quick note. This story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and educational purposes. Any similarity to names or places is coincidental, but the message it carries is one I hope stays with you. The phone rang while I had both hands inside the engine bay of my neighbor's old lawnmower. I heard it buzzing against the metal shelf behind me, that familiar rattle of a cell phone, too old to vibrate properly. I wiped the grease from my fingers with a shop rag that had seen better decades, turned around, and saw the name on the screen. Emily. Something in my chest lifted without permission. I figured she was calling to ask what time I wanted to come over Sunday. Maybe what I wanted for dinner. Father's Day was 3 days out, and for the first time in a while I'd let myself look forward to it. I pressed the phone to my ear. "Hey, sweetheart." "Dad." Her voice had that particular flatness to it, not cold, just careful, pre-rehearsed. I'd been an engineer long enough to recognize a structure built to hold something heavy. "I need to tell you something." I set the shop rag down. "Go ahead." "About Sunday." She exhaled. "I think it'd be better if you didn't come this year." I stood very still in my garage. Outside, a cardinal was going at it in the oak tree, loud and cheerful, completely indifferent to the conversation happening 10 feet below him. "Come again," I said. "Clinton is hosting a dinner." Her words came faster now, the way words do when a person is hoping speed will soften them. "Some of his colleagues are coming, people he's been trying to build relationships with. It's kind of an important thing for him professionally. And with you there, it might get complicated." "Complicated," I repeated. "You know what I mean, Dad. It's just the dynamic. Mom and Clinton are trying to establish their household, and having you show up on Father's Day, it sends a mixed message to his guests." I looked at the photograph pinned to the pegboard above my workbench. Emily, at 6 years old, sitting on my shoulders at the Rutherford County Fair. Her small hands gripping my hair like reins, her face split wide open, with a grin that took up half the picture. I'd kept it there for 11 years, through the divorce, through the quiet Sunday dinners that stopped happening, through all of it. "So Clinton's guests," I said slowly, "would be confused by the presence of your actual father on Father's Day. Dad, please don't make this harder than it needs to be." "I'm not making it anything, Emily. I'm asking a question." She made a sound, not quite a sigh, not quite frustration. Somewhere in between. "It's one day. We'll do something together another time, I promise. Next weekend we'll do dinner, just the two of us." I reached out and straightened the photograph on the pegboard. Emily at 6, grinning like the world was entirely hers. "All right," I said. The word came out even, flat. The way a concrete slab comes out level, not because there's nothing underneath it, but because that's what it was poured to do. "Really?" She sounded surprised, maybe a little relieved. Both of those things hit somewhere behind my sternum, though I kept my voice from showing it. "Thank you for understanding, Dad. I really appreciate it." "Sure." I ended the call. I stood in my garage for a while after that. Not moving, not reaching for anything. The cardinal outside had gone quiet. Late afternoon light came through the single window above the door and fell across the workbench, across the tools hanging in their places, across 40 years of accumulated knowing wrenches and sockets, and a hydraulic bottle jack that had helped me pull damaged steel off of worse situations than most people ever see. I'd spent 4 decades building the habit of assessing damage honestly. No point pretending a crack wasn't there just because looking at it was uncomfortable. My daughter had just told me that my presence at a Father's Day dinner would be an inconvenience to her stepfather's professional relationships. I picked up my coffee mug, found it had gone cold, and set it back down. Then I walked to the truck. The Ford F-250 sat in the far bay of the garage. Dark blue, 11 years old. Reliable in the way that things become reliable when you take care of them consistently. I'd loaded the truck bed out of habit years ago and never unloaded it. A hydraulic bottle jack, 2 heavy-gauge steel cables, a reciprocating saw, bolt cutters, a metal cutting blade, a reflective safety vest, and a first aid kit that would embarrass most ambulances. 40 years of responding to the worst-case scenario had rewired something in my brain. You don't stop carrying what might save a life. I didn't have anywhere to be Sunday. But I had 3 days until then, and a lawnmower that still needed fixing, and a cardinal that had started up again in the oak tree like nothing in the world had changed. I went back to work. I set 2 mugs on this counter before I remembered. Old habit. 30 years of marriage leaves marks on a man that don't fade just because the paperwork does. I stood there in my kitchen at 6 in the morning, looking at those 2 mugs side by side, and then I opened the cabinet and put one back. I poured my coffee, took it to the kitchen table, and sat down in the particular quiet of a house where only one person lives. Father's Day. Outside the neighborhood was still. A dog somewhere down Millbrook Lane was barking at something it probably couldn't identify. The sky above the tree line had turned that pale Tennessee gold that only shows up in early summer mornings, the kind of light that makes everything look softer than it actually is. My phone sat face up on the table. I watched it the way you watch a pot you're not sure will boil. By 8:30, nothing. By 9, still nothing. At 9:14, my phone finally buzzed. My hand moved toward it before my brain caught up, and then I saw the name. Janet Kowalski. My neighbor from 3 houses down. 62 years old, 5 feet tall, had been bringing me casseroles every time something went wrong in my life since her husband passed 4 years ago. I picked up. Morning, Janet. Paul Logan. I just want you to know, she said, her voice bright and no nonsense the way it always was, that you are a wonderful man, and I hope you're having a decent cup of coffee this morning. Something in my throat tightened unexpectedly. I pressed my lips together for a second before answering. Decent enough. Brewed it myself. Well, that's either a good sign or a bad one, depending on the day. She paused. You doing all right? I'm fine, Janet. Thank you for calling. Don't thank me. Just drink your coffee and don't sit in that house all day staring at the walls. You hear me? I almost smiled. Yes, ma'am. She hung up first. I set the phone down and looked at the table for a moment, at the single coffee mug, at the Sunday newspaper I hadn't opened yet. That was when Beverly posted the photo. I don't know why I even looked. Some part of me must have been hoping for nothing, and found something anyway. Clint and Webb stood in front of their house on Elmwood Drive, a brick colonial that cost more than I'd made in my last 8 years of work combined, wearing a linen blazer, the color of money, grinning at the camera, with the practiced ease of a man who had never been told no by anything that mattered. Behind him, a banner hung between 2 porch columns, "World's Greatest Dad," in large gold letters. Emily stood at his right side holding a wrapped gift box with both hands, smiling. The smile I had watched grow from a gap-toothed 6-year-old's grin into the careful, composed expression of a 31-year-old woman who had learned somewhere along the way to perform happiness for photographs. Beverly had written in the caption, "Celebrating the man who makes our family whole." I stared at that caption until the words stopped making sense individually. Then I put the phone face down on the table, pushed back my chair, and stood up. I wasn't angry. I want to be precise about that. What moved through me wasn't hot enough to be anger. It was something older and heavier. The particular ache of a man who has finally stopped being surprised by a thing that has been happening slowly for years. I rinsed my mug, dried it, put it away. Then I got dressed, work jeans, an old flannel shirt, the steel-toed boots I'd worn to job sites for the better part of 2 decades. I grabbed my keys off the hook by the garage door. The F-250 started on the first turn the way it always did. I didn't have a destination. I just knew I wasn't going to spend Father's Day sitting at that kitchen table watching the light change on the wall. I pulled out of the driveway and headed south toward the county road, past the Millbrook Baptist Church, with its marquee sign that read, "God knows where you are," which struck me at that particular moment as either comforting or threatening, depending on your perspective. The truck cab smelled like oil and old leather, and the particular dry metal scent of tools that have been used hard and put away clean. In the bed behind me, the cables and equipment shifted slightly as I turned onto the highway. 40 years of habit. I rolled down the window and let the Tennessee morning come in warm, already thick with the smell of cut grass and red clay, and something blooming in the tree line that I couldn't name but recognized anyway. I had nowhere to be, but the road went somewhere regardless. I had been driving for about 40 minutes when I saw the brake lights. Not a slowdown, a full stop. A line of cars backed up on Route 12, heading toward the Riverstone Bridge overpass, the kind of sudden standstill that makes the hair on your arm stand up if you've spent enough years watching things go wrong. I eased off the gas and let the F-250 roll forward slowly, scanning the road ahead. Then I looked up, and my stomach dropped straight through the floor of the truck. The temporary steel framework above the eastbound lane, the support rigging the crew had installed 3 weeks ago while they replaced the primary deck sections, was wrong. The diagonal brace on the northeast corner had shifted off its bearing plate. The tension cable on the left side hung slack where it should have been taut enough to ring if you struck it. And there, at the main connection point, between the temporary truss and the permanent pier cap, a fresh crack ran diagonal across the concrete face. To anybody else on that road, it was just some old metal framework above a construction zone. To me it was a structure that had maybe 4 minutes before it came down. I hit the horn, 3 long blasts pulled the F-250 onto the shoulder, and had the door open before the truck fully stopped. I yanked my reflective safety vest from behind the seat and pulled it on over my flannel shirt as I ran. The bus was the problem. A full-size charter coach, maybe 35 passengers, already moving on to the bridge approach. Behind it, 3 black SUVs in a close formation, the kind of spacing that said government detail. The eastbound lane was still open to through traffic. The construction restriction only applied to the westbound side. There was no detour, no closure, just a reduced speed zone and a framework above it that was no longer doing what it was supposed to do. I ran out in front of the bus with both arms up, waving hard. The driver leaned on the air horn. The sound hit me like a wall. "Stop the vehicle!" I shouted loud, as I had ever shouted anything in 40 years. "Stop right now! The structure above you is failing!" The driver's face appeared in the windshield. Fury first, then confusion, then something shifting behind his eyes as he registered the reflective vest, the hard boots, the absolute certainty on my face. He stood on the brakes. The bus shuddered to a stop 10 feet from the marked construction zone. Behind it, the three black SUVs began braking. The first two stopped cleanly. The third one didn't. The rear SUV slid on a patch of debris near the shoulder, clipped the temporary barrier railing, and the impact was enough. The northeast brace let go with a sound like a rifle shot, a sharp metallic crack that bounced off the valley walls and made every person on that bridge flinch at once. The temporary truss section dropped. It came down on the rear corner of the SUV like a hammer caving the roof on the driver's side, pushing the vehicle sideways until the front wheels went off the bridge deck, and the whole frame tilted at a sickening angle over the Riverstone Gorge below. People started screaming. I was already moving. I got to the F-250, pulled both steel cables from the truck bed, and grabbed the hydraulic bottle jack, a 40-ton industrial unit I'd carried since a job in Murfreesboro, where we'd needed to lift a collapsed pedestrian walkway section off of a maintenance crew. I ran back to the SUV with the cables over my shoulder. "Hey!" A hand caught my arm. I turned. Dale Hutchins, 58 years old, heavyset, wearing a TDOT contractor vest over a University of Tennessee sweatshirt. We'd worked 3 bridge rehab projects together over the years, the last one on the Cumberland River crossing in 2019. His face was the color of old chalk. "Paul." His voice cracked on my name. "Paul. I filed a report on that brace 3 weeks ago. I sent the inspection form to the TDOT district office. They flagged it non-urgent, said the budget review wasn't until next quarter." His hands were shaking so hard, the clipboard he was holding rattled. "The committee that controls that allocation, the Senate Transportation Committee, their chairman is supposed to be in that motorcade." I looked at the SUV hanging off the edge of the bridge. Then I looked at Dale. "Help me anchor this cable to your site vehicle," I said. "Right now." Dale's mouth opened-closed. His eyes filled, not quite tears, but close enough the look of a man carrying 3 weeks of a warning. Nobody listened to and watching it arrive anyway. "Dale," I put my hand on his shoulder firm. "I need you right now. Fall apart later. Can you do that?" He pulled in a breath that shook the whole way down. "Yeah." He straightened. "Yeah, I can do that." We moved. The SUV was tilted at roughly 30 degrees off horizontal front wheels, hanging over the gorge, the crushed roof section pinned under 400 pounds of steel framework. I did the math in about 8 seconds. The vehicle's center of gravity was still on the bridge deck, barely. The temporary truss had come down at an angle, which meant the weight distribution was uneven. If we tried to lift the steel straight up, we'd shift the balance point and send the SUV over the edge. We needed to anchor first, lift second, extract third. In that order, no deviations. "Dale, run that cable from the rear axle to your site truck's tow hitch," I said, already moving to position the hydraulic jack under the truss section. "Keep the line taut, but don't cinch it yet. When I tell you, take up the slack, slow and steady, not a jerk." "Got it." Dale moved fast for a big man, his hands steadier now that there was a task in front of him. I got on my knees beside the driver's door. The window was gone, shattered by the impact. The driver was conscious, barely. His left shoulder pushed down at an angle that made my stomach clench. Seatbelt had kept him in place. "Good." Sir, can you hear me?" The driver's eyes found mine. "Yeah." His voice was thin. "Yeah, I hear you. I need you to stay exactly where you are. Don't try to move, don't reach for anything. Can you do that?" My shoulder. "I know. We'll deal with that. Stay still." I moved to the rear door. The frame had buckled inward from the truss impact, but the door itself had held. I got the bolt cutters from my vest, worked the latch mechanism, and pulled. The door groaned open. Inside, a man in a dark suit, unconscious head lolled against the window, the security detail from the look of him. Pulse strong when I checked his neck. Breathing. Head laceration, maybe a concussion, but alive. I left him for the moment. The man in the back seat was another matter. He was in his early 60s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that had probably cost more than my truck. His right leg was pinned where the rear floor had buckled upward from the impact. I was conscious, eyes clear and sharp despite everything, and the first thing he said to me was not what I expected. "The driver," he said, his voice tight with controlled pain. "And my security man, are they alive?" His leg was trapped, and the vehicle was hanging over a gorge, and he was asking about his people first. I filed that away. "Both alive," I said. "Stay still. I'm going to get you out." "What do you need me to do?" "Talk to me. Keep talking so I know you're with me." I got the pry bar from my belt and worked the floor panel, trying to create enough clearance to free his leg. The vehicle shifted maybe an inch, maybe less, and every person outside the SUV made a sound. At once, a collective intake of breath sharp enough to hear over the wind. My hands did not shake. 40 years. You learn to work when your hands want to shake. "You're an engineer," the man said. Not a question. "Retired," I said, working the pry bar. "Structural. You knew the bridge was going to fail." "I recognized the signs." "How long did you have?" 4 minutes. Maybe less. The floor panel gave another inch. His leg was almost free. "Stop talking for a second and push yourself toward me when I say go." He nodded. His jaw was tight with pain, a muscle jumping in his cheek, but his eyes stayed locked on mine. The vehicle lurched. Outside, Dale shouted, "Cable's holding, but the frame's moving. Paul, you need to move now." "Go," I said. The man grabbed my forearm with both hands and pushed with everything he had. His leg came free with a sound that made him suck in a sharp breath through his teeth. Pain so sudden and raw, it came out as a single hard syllable. Not quite a word, the sound a person makes when they hit the absolute edge of what they can contain. I got my arm around his back and pulled him toward the door. We came out of the SUV together and hit the bridge deck hard, both of us going down to our knees. Dale was there, immediately grabbing the man's other arm, helping us clear the vehicle. 17 seconds later, the cable tension on the rear axle gave way. The SUV went over the edge without drama, no explosion, no Hollywood moment. Just the quiet, terrible sound of metal and glass disappearing into the gorge below. Then the distant crash of it hitting the water, and then nothing. The three of us knelt on the bridge deck and breathed. A hand closed around my forearm. I looked down at it, then up at the silver-haired man beside me. His face was the color of concrete dust, and his eyes were wet, not crying, but close enough that the distinction didn't matter much. "Thank you," he said. His voice had lost its careful composure just for that moment. Raw and real and grateful, in a way that no amount of professional training could smooth over. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," I said. "You've still got a broken bridge to deal with." A man in a black vest appeared at a run, earpiece in hand, already reaching for his radio. He dropped to one knee beside the silver-haired man, gripping his shoulder. "Senator Harrison." His voice cracked with relief. "Senator, we've got EMS 30 seconds out." Senator Richard Harrison, chairman of the Tennessee Senate Transportation Committee. I sat back on my heels on the bridge deck and looked at Dale. Dale looked back at me, his eyes red-rimmed, the clipboard still somehow in his hand. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. There were no words built for a moment like this, where the thing you had been afraid of for 3 weeks had just arrived, and somehow, impossibly, hadn't taken anybody with it. His chin started to tremble. He pressed his lips together hard, fighting it, and lost. "I kept telling them," he said, and his voice broke open completely. "I kept telling them it wasn't safe." I put my hand on his shoulder and kept it there. The paramedics arrived in 2 units, lights going, and the bridge became a different kind of chaos, organized, purposeful, the kind that knows what it's doing. I stepped back and let them work. A young EMT wrapped a pressure bandage around the cut on my forearm. I hadn't noticed it happening sometime during the extraction. A piece of sheared metal had opened up a 4-inch gash just below my elbow. The EMT was maybe 24, focused, gentle in the efficient way of someone trained to treat people who are trying to wave them off. "Hold still, sir," he said. "I'm fine. You've got a significant laceration, and your blood pressure is probably through the roof right now. Hold still." I held still. That was when she appeared. Brenda Reynolds, Channel 4, Nashville. 38 years old, dark blazer press credential clipped to her lapel, a camera woman 3 steps behind her with a broadcast unit on her shoulder. Brenda had the particular walk of a journalist who has covered enough breaking news to move through controlled chaos like it belongs to her. She stopped in front of me, looked at the bandage going onto my arm, looked at the gorge where the SUV had gone down, looked at the reflective vest over my flannel shirt. "Sir," she said, "I'm Brenda Reynolds with Channel 4. Can I ask you a few questions?" "You can ask," I said. She took that as a yes and nodded to her camera woman. A small red light blinked on above the lens. "Can you tell me your name and what you do?" "Paul Logan, retired structural engineer." "Mr. Logan, you stopped a charter bus and identified the structural failure before it happened. How did you know?" "The temporary brace on the northeast corner had shifted off its bearing plate," I said. "The tension cable was slack. There was a new diagonal crack on the main connection point. Those 3 things together, that's not a maintenance issue. That's a structure telling you it's done." Brenda nodded, her eyes sharp. "You had equipment in your truck. Cables, a hydraulic jack." "Why, old habit. 40 years on job sites. You don't stop carrying what might save a life." She paused for just a moment. A reporter's pause, the kind that means the next question is the one she actually came for. "Mr. Logan," she said, "it's Father's Day. Why are you out here alone?" The question landed in my chest with a weight I hadn't expected. I looked past Brenda for a moment, at the bus still sitting where it had stopped, 37 passengers, now standing outside it in small groups, some of them holding each other, some of them on phones. One woman with her forehead pressed against the shoulder of a man I assumed was her husband, her whole body shaking with sobs. She was trying to keep quiet. 37 people who would go home tonight. I looked back at Brenda. "My daughter had other plans," I said. "Her mother's husband is hosting a dinner. Some professional event colleagues, people he wanted to impress. Having me there would have complicated things, so I took the day for myself." I paused. "I ended up here instead." Brenda's expression didn't change, but something moved behind her eyes. "Are you angry at them?" I thought about that honestly for a second. "No," I said. "Sometimes being pushed out of one place just means life needs you somewhere else." Brenda held my gaze for a moment longer than a standard interview required. Then she turned slightly toward the camera and wrapped the segment with a line about the senator's condition and the investigation into the bridge framework. I didn't know the camera was still rolling when she turned back to me. "Off the record," she said quietly. "Are you okay?" "I'm always okay," I said. "It's just a day." She looked at me the way women look at men who say things like that, like she could see exactly what the sentence was holding up and had decided not to push on it. "Thank you, Mr. Logan," she said. What neither of us knew was that Channel 4 had been running a live feed for the past 11 minutes. Every word of that interview, including the part about my daughter's other plans, had gone out over the air in real time. I wasn't in that room. I want to be clear about that. What I know about the next 20 minutes, I learned in pieces from Diane from Beverly, from a few details. Emily eventually told me herself, months later, when she could talk about it without her voice breaking apart halfway through a sentence. But I've heard it enough times now that I can see it. The dining room at the Elmwood Drive house was set for 14. Linen tablecloth catered food from a place in Green Hills that charged $40 a plate, a centerpiece of white hydrangeas that Beverly had spent 45 minutes arranging that morning. Clinton sat at the head of the table in a blazer that probably cost more than my truck payment, holding court the way men like Clinton hold court, easy, expansive, filling the room with the particular confidence of someone who has never had to wonder whether he belonged in it. Emily sat 3 chairs down, between Diane Marsh and a woman named Karen Aldridge, whose husband was a managing director at Clinton's firm. Emily had been quiet through most of the meal, which Diane told me later she'd noticed, but hadn't known how to address without making things worse. Then Gerald Parton, sitting near the kitchen doorway, looked at his phone. "Hey," he said, "turn up the TV." The television in the living room had been running muted in the background, Channel 4, the local midday news. Someone found the remote and brought the volume up. My face filled the screen. Diane told me that the room didn't erupt. It didn't gasp or exclaim. It did something quieter and more devastating than that. It simply stopped. Forks going still above plates. Conversations ending mid-word. 14 people redirecting their complete attention to a 65-year-old man in a reflective safety vest, standing on a bridge with a bandage going onto his forearm, answering a reporter's questions in a voice that didn't shake. They heard Brenda ask why I was out there alone on Father's Day. They heard me say my daughter had other plans. Diane told me that when those words came out of the television, she turned and looked directly at Emily. Emily's face had gone the color of old paper, not flushed, not crumpling, just drained, like something essential had been quietly pulled out from under her expression. It was Karen Aldridge's husband, Richard, a man Emily had met exactly twice, who spoke first. "Is that your father?" he asked. His voice was careful, the kind of careful that isn't actually careful at all. Emily's throat moved. She reached for her water glass and then put it back down without drinking. "Yes," she said. "That's my dad." The word dad landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Everyone felt the ripple. Clinton set his fork down with a small, precise click. "Paul's not really a social event kind of person," he said, and his smile was the practiced kind, the kind built to cover distance. "He prefers to do his own thing on holidays. It's just how he is." Diane told me she watched Clinton say those words and felt something harden in her chest. "Clinton," she said, and her voice came out steadier than she expected. "That man just pulled a senator out of a car hanging over a gorge on the day your family asked him to stay home." The table went very still. On the television, Harrison's office had just released a statement. A Channel 4 anchor was reading it live. Senator Richard Harrison, chairman of the Tennessee Senate Transportation Committee, had issued formal recognition of the retired structural engineer who had identified the structural failure and performed the extraction. The statement named me by name. Karen Aldridge's husband put his napkin on the table. "I think we should get going," he said to his wife. He didn't look at Clinton when he said it. 2 other couples followed within 10 minutes. One of the men shook Clinton's hand on the way out briefly, the way you shake a hand when you're doing it out of obligation rather than warmth. Another couple left without making eye contact at all. Emily told me later that she sat at that table for a long time after people started leaving. The hydrangea centerpiece, the $40 plates going cold. the banner still hanging in the front hallway. World's Greatest Dad in gold letters catching the afternoon light coming through the window. She picked up her phone. She opened my contact. Her thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment, long enough that the screen dimmed, and she had to touch it again to keep it lit. Then she closed the app and set the phone face down on the table. Beverly said nothing through all of it. She sat at the far end of the table, with her hands folded in her lap, watching the television, long after the segment about me had ended, and the news had moved on to something else entirely. Clinton refilled his wine glass. Nobody asked him to pass the bottle. I got home around 4 in the afternoon. The hospital had wanted to keep me another hour for observation. Blood pressure still elevated the cut on my forearm, requiring 6 stitches that a young ER doctor put in with the focused efficiency of someone who had done it 800 times before. I sat on the exam table and let him work, and didn't look at my phone for most of it. When I finally did, there were 214 text messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Not one of them was from Emily. I drove home with the windows down. The Tennessee evening was coming in warm and thick, the kind of heat that doesn't break until well after dark, carrying the smell of honeysuckle from the tree line along Route 12. I pulled into my driveway, cut the engine, and sat in the truck for a minute, just listening to it tick as it cooled. Inside, I poured a glass of water, stood at the kitchen sink, drinking it, and looked out the window at the backyard. The oak tree Beverly had always wanted me to take down, too close to the house, she used to say. One bad storm, and we'll regret it, was moving gently in the early evening breeze, its shadow long across the grass. I went out to the porch with a cup of coffee and sat in the chair that faced west. The sky out that direction was doing something worth watching. Layers of orange and deep red where the sun was dropping behind the ridge. The kind of Tennessee summer sunset that makes you understand why people stay here their whole lives, even when they have reasons to leave. I watched it and drank my coffee and didn't think about very much at all, which was its own kind of relief. Janet's text came in at 5:47. Saw the full report on Channel 4. 6 stitches and a senator. Not bad for a Sunday. Proud of you, neighbor. I read it twice. Something in my chest loosened slightly, the way a knot loosens when you stop pulling against it. I typed back, "Thank you, Janet." Sent it. Put the phone in my shirt pocket. The sky had gone deep purple by then, the first stars showing up faint and tentative at the eastern edge. The breeze had shifted direction, coming out of the southwest, now warmer and heavier, carrying moisture with it. I'd been reading weather long enough to know what that meant. I went inside and checked the radar on my laptop. A line of storms was pushing up from Alabama, the serious kind, with solid red cores, and the particular shape that forecasters call a squall line, not scattered thunderstorms, but an organized system moving fast. Nashville was in the path. ETA, the radar estimated somewhere between midnight and 2 in the morning. I went to the garage and checked the generator fuel was good, transfer switch working. I walked to the truck and verified the cables and equipment were secured in the bed, the way I always did before a bad storm. Old habit. You check what matters before you need it, not after. I was walking back across the garage when my phone rang. I pulled it out, expecting Janet again, maybe a number I didn't recognize. The name on the screen stopped me mid-step. Beverly. Not Emily. Beverly. I stood in the middle of my garage holding the phone while it rang a second time, feeling something shift in my chest that I couldn't immediately name. Not quite surprise, not quite the bracing feeling of expecting bad news. Something in between with an edge to it I hadn't felt in a long time. I answered on the third ring. Beverly. Paul. Her voice was different than I expected. Not the bright social register she'd learned to use in the years since the divorce, the one that kept everything at a comfortable, managed distance. This was something older. Something from before all of it. I need to say something. Go ahead. She was quiet for just a moment, not avoidance, just the particular pause of someone choosing words they mean to stand behind. I should have called you this morning, she said. First thing, I should have called you and said, Happy Father's Day, and I didn't, and I'm sorry. The words landed somewhere I wasn't prepared for them to land. My jaw tightened. I pressed my back teeth together and looked at the wall of the garage, the tools hanging in their places, the hydraulic jack back in its bracket, the coiled cables, all of it exactly where it belonged. Beverly, I started. You don't have to say anything, she said. I'm not calling to have a conversation about it. I just needed to say it. A beat. Her voice, when it came back, was quieter. You did something today that a lot of people couldn't have done. And you did it alone because we made sure you would be alone, and I... She stopped, steadied herself. That's all. That's what I needed to say. The line went quiet. Not dead, I could hear her breathing slow and deliberate. Then she hung up. I stood in my garage for a long moment, after that phone in my hand, looking at nothing in particular. The wind outside had picked up. Through the gap at the bottom of the garage door, I could see the leaves in the driveway starting to skitter and turn. The storm was coming faster than the radar had suggested. I checked the cables on the truck one more time. Then I went inside, sat in the kitchen, and waited. The clock on the microwave read 12:14 when the phone rang. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table for 2 hours, listening to the storm work its way through. It had arrived ahead of schedule, the way bad things often do, and it had come in hard. Rain hammering the windows in waves, wind finding every gap in the eaves and making its presence known. The power had flickered twice. The generator in the garage was standing by. I wasn't sleeping. I don't sleep well in storms. 40 years of being the person called when structures fail in bad weather had permanently rewired something in the part of my brain that was supposed to rest. The phone screen lit up on the table in front of me. Emily. I picked it up before the second ring finished. Emily. What came through the line wasn't a voice. It was sound, raw, broken sound, the kind that comes before words, when a person has gone past the point where words organize themselves properly. Wind shrieking in the background, something crashing heavy and structural, glass breaking somewhere distant in the call. Dad. Her voice finally broke through, and it was barely a voice at all, high and thin and shaking so hard the syllables came apart. Dad, please, I need you to come right now, please. I was already on my feet. Emily, talk to me. What happened? The oak tree. She sucked in a breath that sounded like it hurt. The big one out front, it came. Dad, the whole thing. It went through the roof, and part of it came into the garage, and the upstairs ceiling part of it came down. And she's stuck in her room. She can't get the door open. Something fell against it from outside, and... Her voice collapsed into a sob that she pulled back together through sheer effort. And Marcus Clinton's son, he's 12 years old, Dad. He's stuck in the back hallway. There's a beam across the corridor, and he can't get past it, and he's been crying for 20 minutes, and I don't know what to do. Where's Clinton? He's outside. He's trying to cut the tree, but his saw, it's a cordless one, not nearly strong enough for a trunk that size, and now the battery's dead anyway, and he doesn't... She made a sound of pure frustration, mixed with fear, something between a sob and a gasp. He doesn't know what he's doing, Dad. He's standing there in the rain, holding a dead saw, and the whole second floor is making sounds, and I'm scared, I'm so scared. Emily. My voice came out level, deliberate. The voice I used on job sites when a situation had moved past the point where panic was useful. Listen to me. Is Marcus hurt? I don't think so. He's scared, Dad. He keeps calling for Clinton, and Clinton can't get to him. Okay. I was already moving through the kitchen toward the garage door, grabbing my rain jacket off the hook, my boots from the mat. I need you to do exactly what I say right now. Tell everyone to move away from the main trunk of the tree. Nobody touches the primary branch, not Clinton, not anyone. Do you understand me? Yes. Find the breaker panel and kill power to the whole house. If you can't find it, unplug everything you can reach on the ground floor. A wet structure with live electricity is a different problem than a wet structure without it. Okay. I could hear her moving, her breath coming in ragged pulls. Dad, are you coming? I had my jacket on, keys in my hand. The garage door button was under my thumb. I'm coming, I said. A sound came out of her then, not quite a sob, not quite a word, the sound of a person who has been holding themselves together through an emergency on pure adrenaline, and has just been told that help is actually on the way. The relief in it was so raw, it pressed against something behind my sternum that I hadn't expected to feel tonight. Thank you, she whispered. Dad, thank you. Save it. Get away from the tree and kill that power. Go. I backed the F-250 out of the garage into the full force of the storm. The rain hit the windshield so hard, the wipers couldn't keep up at their highest setting, just smearing the water around, giving me a half-second of visibility between sweeps. I turned onto Millbrook Lane with my headlights cutting through the dark, and the rain, and the debris already starting to collect on the road, small branches first, then larger ones as I pushed south toward Elmwood Drive. Halfway there, a tree had come down across both lanes of Cedar Fork Road. I pulled the F-250 onto the shoulder, left the engine running, got out into the rain with the reciprocating saw, and took the trunk apart in 4 cuts. 6 minutes. Back in the truck, soaked through my jacket, already rain running off the brim of my cap in a steady pour. I drove the last mile to Beverly's house with my jaw set and my hands steady on the wheel. Whatever I was feeling about this family, about this day, about the phone call 3 days ago in my garage, none of that was useful right now. I put it somewhere I could find it later and drove. A 12-year-old boy was scared and stuck in a hallway. That was the only thing that mattered. Before we go further, comment the word storm below so I know you're still in this with me. What comes next is the moment that changed everything, and I don't want you to miss it. Please note this story includes fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. If that's not the right fit for you, no hard feelings. The door is always open when you're ready to come back. The Elmwood Drive house looked like something had reached down out of the sky and grabbed it. The oak tree, and it was enormous. The kind of tree that takes 80 years to grow and 10 seconds to destroy everything it falls on lay across the roofline at a diagonal. Its root ball torn out of the ground and standing vertical in the front yard, like a wall of earth and rock. The crown had gone through the second floor on the east side. The garage was gone. One of the upstairs windows was lit from inside with a flashlight beam moving in short, panicked arcs. Clinton Webb was standing in the front yard in the rain. He was wearing the linen blazer from the party, soaked completely through, dark with water and streaked with mud across one shoulder where he must have slipped. In his right hand, he held a cordless electric saw, a homeowner model, the kind built for yard cleanup, and nothing more. The blade had jammed halfway through a lower branch, and he hadn't been able to free it. The battery indicator on the side showed red. Dead. He looked up when my headlights hit him. Something moved across his face, relief first immediate and unguarded, and then something harder to name. Not quite shame, The thing that comes just before shame when a man hasn't finished processing what he's looking at yet. Paul. His voice cracked on my name. Paul, thank God. Where is everyone? Not a question. I was already out of the truck pulling on my work gloves. Beverly's upstairs east bedroom doors blocked from outside. Marcus is in the back hallway. There's a something came through the ceiling. A beam. I think it's across the corridor. Emily's inside trying to keep him calm through the door. He was talking fast, his words tumbling over each other. I tried to cut the main trunk, but the battery... Put that saw down, I said. Don't touch the tree again. I walked the perimeter of the house in 90 seconds, headlamp on rain hammering my shoulders. What I saw confirmed what I'd suspected from the road. The tree wasn't just resting on the roof. Its weight was pulling the entire east wall framing outward. I could see the gap opening between the fascia board and the roofline, a dark seam that hadn't been there when this house was built. If the trunk shifted further, the east side of the second floor wouldn't come down gradually. It would come down all at once. I needed to hold the trunk in position before I could do anything else. I backed the F-250 to the edge of the yard, unspooled the first steel cable, and ran it from the tree trunk to the truck's rear tow hitch, keeping the angle low to minimize upward pull on the root system. The second cable I ran from a point 6 feet up the trunk to the concrete support column at the corner of the porch, a fixed anchor that wasn't going anywhere. Clinton. I held out the free end of a rigging line attached to the trunk's upper section. I need you to hold this. Both hands wrap it twice around your wrists, lean your weight back against it. When I tell you to take up slack, you pull. When I tell you to hold, you stop moving. Can you do that? He grabbed the line with both hands. His knuckles went white immediately. Yes, I've got it. I got the hydraulic jack positioned under the dip in the main roof beam, where the trunk had depressed it, started pumping the handle in slow measured strokes. The beam groaned. The trunk shifted a quarter inch away from the wall, not toward it. Good. Hold, I said. I went through the ground floor window Emily had left unlatched, climbed through into the dark interior, and moved toward the sound of Beverly's voice upstairs. She was calling out in short bursts, not screaming, just steadily announcing her location, the way a person does when they've decided panic isn't going to help them. I found the bedroom door with a section of ceiling joist resting across the outside handle. I lifted it clear, shouldered the door open. Beverly came out into the hallway, and her legs nearly went out from under her. I caught her elbow. I've got you, I said. Paul. Her voice broke on my name, just that one syllable, and her hand gripped my forearm so hard I felt it through the glove. Paul Marcus. I know. Come on. I got her to the window and lowered her down to Emily, who was waiting below with her arms up, crying openly, now tears and rain indistinguishable on her face. Beverly hit the ground, and Emily grabbed her and held on. I went back in for Marcus. I was where Emily had said, back hallway, a ceiling beam down across the corridor at chest height blocking his path. He was pressed into the corner with his knees pulled up, 12 years old, and small for his age, his face streaked with tears and plaster dust, his eyes finding me in the beam of my headlamp. Hey, Marcus? I kept my voice even. My name's Paul. I'm going to get you out of here. Is my dad out there? His voice was barely a whisper, rough from crying. He's right outside. He's waiting for you. I positioned the hydraulic jack under the beam, started pumping. The beam rose in slow increments, an inch, 2 inches, 3. That was when I heard Clinton shout from outside. The rigging line had gone taut so suddenly that the load increase had yanked it through his grip. The wet rope had burned through his palms before he could compensate, and he'd stumbled backward, releasing the tension entirely. through the broken window. At the end of the hallway, I saw the upper trunk begin to shift. And I saw Emily. She came from nowhere, running across the wet grass, grabbing the rigging line off the ground, wrapping it twice around the concrete porch column, and throwing her full body weight back against it. Two neighbors who'd been watching from across the street came running without being asked, grabbing the line behind her. The trunk stopped moving. Emily stood in the rain, with the rope burning her palms, her feet braced against the wet ground, her whole body shaking with the effort, and the cold, and something else entirely. I looked at her through that broken window for 1 second. Then I turned back to Marcus. "Okay, buddy," I said. "I need you to crawl toward me right now. Keep your head down. Don't stop moving." He moved. Marcus was small enough to clear the beam with 18 inches to spare. I kept the jack handle, moving slow, steady strokes, holding the beam at the height. I'd pumped it, my left hand braced against the wall to feel for any vibration that would tell me the structure above us was about to give more than I'd calculated for. Marcus came through on his hands and knees, plaster dust in his hair, his breathing coming in the fast, shallow pulls of a kid who had been scared for a long time and was running on the last of what fear had given him. He got to my side of the beam, and I grabbed his arm and pulled him upright. "Don't run," I said. "Walk fast, stay low right behind me. Don't touch the walls." "Okay." His voice was a thread. "Okay, I'm okay." He wasn't okay. His legs were shaking so badly I could feel it through his arm where I held him. But he was moving, and moving was what mattered. We went down the hallway toward the front of the house. Above us, the roof was making sounds I didn't like, a deep, low creaking that wasn't the wind, the kind of sound a timber frame makes when the load distribution has shifted past the point the original design accounted for. I counted the steps to the window. 12, 10, 8. Behind us, something let go. Not the whole ceiling, just a section, maybe 4 feet of drywall and insulation, dropping straight down at the far end of the hallway where we'd just been. The impact shook the floor under our feet, and Marcus stumbled. I caught him by the back of his jacket and kept him moving. 5 steps. 3. 1. I got him through this window, first hands on his waist, lifting him to the sill. Then Emily was there on the outside with both arms up, and she actually took his full weight as he came through, staggering back 2 steps in the mud before she caught her footing. I came through after him. My boots hit the wet ground, and I straightened up and turned around, and the section of roof above the window we'd just come through sagged inward with a sound like a thunderclap, wood and tile, and 40 years of accumulated weight folding down into the space we'd occupied 8 seconds ago. Nobody moved for a moment. The rain kept falling. It didn't care about any of it. Then Marcus turned around. He looked at me with those red-rimmed eyes full of plaster dust and tears, this 12-year-old kid in his ruined clothes, and something in his face cracked, completely open. He stepped forward and put both arms around my waist and held on with everything he had. His face pressed against my chest, his whole body shaking with sobs he'd been holding back for the better part of an hour. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I put my hand on the back of his head and held on right back. Clinton reached us in 4 long strides, dropping to his knees in the mud, beside his son, wrapping his arms around Marcus from the side. His face had gone completely undone, no blazer, composure left, no professional ease, just a father's raw terror converting itself into relief so intense it came out as a sound. I don't have a word for something between a sob and a groan that he pressed into his son's hair. "I've got you," he kept saying. "I've got you, I've got you." Beverly was sitting against the base of the porch steps, wrapped in a thermal blanket from my truck. Emily crouched beside her with both arms around her mother's shoulders. Beverly had her face turned into Emily's neck, and her hand was pressed flat against Emily's back, and they were both crying, the quiet kind that comes after the danger has passed, and the body finally gets permission to feel what it's been holding. I walked a few feet away and stood in the rain by myself for a moment. My hands were steady. They always stayed steady until afterward. It was a thing I'd learned about myself a long time ago, that I could hold it together for exactly as long as the job required. And then when the job was done, I needed about 90 seconds alone to let my nervous system remember that it was allowed to exist again. I took those 90 seconds. Then I heard the engines. 2 Nashville Fire Department units came around the corner of Elmwood Drive, with their lights going, followed by an EMS unit. They'd gotten through on a parallel road. Someone had cleared a path. Captain Ray Odom climbed down from the lead unit, broad-shouldered, mid-40s, a man who moved through disaster scenes with the particular unhurried authority of someone who had seen the full range of what bad nights could produce. I took in the house, the cables still running from the tree trunk to my truck, the hydraulic jack visible through the ground floor window, the crowd of neighbors who'd assembled on the lawn. Then he looked at me. "You do all this," he said, "with some help." He walked the perimeter the way I had, slower, with a flashlight. When he came back, he stood in front of me and looked at my face for a moment. "I've been doing this job for 19 years, he said. "I want to be straight with you about something." He turned slightly toward the cluster of neighbors and the family still gathered near the porch steps, raising his voice enough to carry. "Without the work this man did tonight, the cable rigging, the jack placement, the sequencing of the extraction, we are looking at a minimum of 3 fatalities in this structure, on top of the 2 lives saved at Riverstone Bridge this afternoon." He looked back at me. "That's 5 people who went home tonight because of you." He extended his hand. I shook it. Across the yard, Emily lifted her face from her mother's shoulder and looked at me through the rain. Her eyes were swollen and red, and her hair was plastered flat against her face, and she looked at me the way she hadn't looked at me in years, not with need, not with calculation, not with the managed distance she'd learned somewhere along the road from 6 years old to 31. Just looking. Just seeing. I held her gaze for a moment. Then Brenda Reynolds's van turned onto Elmwood Drive with its lights on. Brenda Reynolds did not look like a woman who had been pulled out of bed at 2 in the morning. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for the second half of a story she already knew was going to matter. Her camera woman was with her, same unit as the bridge, same steady professional focus. Brenda walked across the wet lawn toward me with her press credential swinging against her blazer and her eyes taking in the collapsed roofline, the cables still running from the tree to my truck. Captain Odom's crew beginning their assessment. She stopped in front of me. "Mr. Logan," she said. "Channel 4. We met this afternoon." "I remember. Can I ask you a few more questions?" I looked at my watch. 2:47 in the morning. My forearm was throbbing where the stitches were. The bandage had gotten soaked through somewhere in the last 2 hours, and every muscle in my back was filing a formal complaint about the last several hours of activity. "Go ahead," I said. The red light on the camera blinked on. "The family inside this house," Brenda said carefully. "Is this the same family that asked you not to come today?" I could feel the weight of that question settling over the lawn. Odom's crew had gone quiet nearby. 2 neighbors who'd helped hold the rope were still standing at the edge of the yard, listening. "It is," I said. "Why did you come?" I thought about that for exactly as long as it deserved. "Because someone called me who needed help," I said. That's the whole answer. It doesn't get more complicated than that. Brenda held her microphone steady. "But after everything that happened today, being asked to stay away the party, there was a child in danger," I said. 12 years old, stuck in a hallway, scared out of his mind. He didn't make any decisions about who got invited to whose party. He just needed somebody to come get him. I looked at Brenda directly. That's not heroism. That's just what you do. Brenda nodded, once the particular nod of a journalist who has just gotten exactly what she came for and knows it. She was about to rap when I heard footsteps behind me. Emily. She came to stand about 6 feet away, not quite beside me, not quite separate, the particular distance of someone who wants to be in a conversation. They aren't sure they have the right to enter. Her hair was still rain flat. There was a cut on her palm from the rope that she hadn't had looked at yet. A dark line across the base of her fingers that she was holding slightly curled at her side. Brenda looked at her, then at me. I turned to Emily. I came because it was right, I said. My voice was quiet enough that it didn't carry to the camera, quiet enough that it was just the two of us for the moment. But I need you to hear something. Don't mistake what I did tonight for permission to keep treating me like a backup option. I'm not a tool you reach for when everything else has failed. My chest was tight, saying it not with anger, but with the accumulated weight of years of saying nothing, and I kept my voice steady through it. I'm your father. That means something. It has to mean something when things are going well, not only when the roof comes down. Emily's face crumpled. Not gradually, all at once, the way a face goes when a person has run completely out of the ability to hold their expression in place. Her chin shook. Her eyes filled so fast the tears were already running before she'd had time to blink. She pressed the back of her uninjured hand against her mouth, and a sound came out from behind it that she was clearly trying to contain and couldn't. Dad! The word came out broken in the middle. Just that one word, just his name for me, and she couldn't finish whatever she'd meant to say after it. I know, I said. I didn't open my arms. I didn't tell her it was fine. I just stood there in the rain and let her feel the full weight of what she was feeling, because she'd earned it, and because sometimes that's the most honest thing you can offer someone. After a moment I said, "Get that hand looked at." She nodded, wiping her face with her wrist. "Okay," she managed. "Okay, Dad." I told Brenda I would, and she thanked me and didn't push. Clinton stepped forward as I walked toward the truck. He opened his mouth. I saw it, the preparation for something. An explanation, or an apology, or some version of the conversation that men like Clinton have rehearsed because they expect to need it eventually. I shook my head once, not unkindly, just not tonight. He closed his mouth. He nodded. I got in the truck. I sat there for a minute before starting the engine, letting the rain on the roof fill up the quiet. My hands rested on the steering wheel, and I looked at the house, at the cable still taut from my truck, to the tree, at the lights of Odom's crew moving through the ground floor, at Beverly. Sitting on the porch steps, now with a blanket around her shoulders, and Emily crouched beside her, talking. My phone rang. The name on the screen, Senator R. Harrison. I answered. Mr. Logan. His voice was different than it had been on the bridge, steadier. The shock metabolized into something more controlled. I apologize for the hour. I've been on the phone with Dale Hutchins for the past 2 hours. He brought me the full inspection file. I figured he would. The TDOT district office received his report on May 27th. They classified it non-urgent pending the next budget allocation cycle, which wasn't scheduled until September. A pause. My committee oversees TDOT's budget authority. We were never formally notified that report existed. His voice tightened slightly in anger, the particular clipped tone of a man who is very angry and has decided to be precise about it instead. I'm requesting an expedited hearing before the Senate Transportation Committee. I'd like you to appear as an expert witness, not as the man who saved lives today, as the engineer who can explain what that inspection report actually meant. I looked out the windshield at the rain. When? I said. 4 weeks. I want to give your arm time to heal. A brief pause. How is your arm? 6 stitches. I'll have my office contact you Monday morning. Another pause, shorter, different in quality. Mr. Logan, I heard what just happened here tonight. Word travels fast when a fire captain starts talking. His voice dropped a register. You're a remarkable man. I'm a structural engineer with good cables and a full tank of gas, I said. Monday morning is fine. I ended the call. I sat in the dark truck on Elmwood Drive and felt something settle in my chest that I hadn't felt in a long time. I'm not satisfaction, exactly, not pride. Something quieter. The particular stillness of a man who has done what he was built to do and hasn't lost himself in the doing of it. I started the engine. The road home was clear. I got home at 3:51 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at the microwave clock when I came through the kitchen door, the same clock that had shown me 12:14 when Emily's call came in. Something about that symmetry felt significant in the way things feel significant at 4 in the morning when you're running on adrenaline and stitches, and the particular exhaustion that comes from a day that has asked more of you than days are usually built to ask. I peeled off my wet jacket and hung it over the garage door handle to dry. Sat on the kitchen floor to pull off my boots. My back made its opinion of this known immediately and loudly, and left them by the door. Went upstairs, showered the plaster dust and rain and bridge debris off my skin, and was asleep before my head finished settling into the pillow. I slept 4 hours, dreamlessly, completely, the way you sleep when your body has simply decided the conversation is over. When I woke up, the Tennessee morning was coming through the curtains in long, flat bands of gold, and the birds outside were carrying on like nothing unusual had happened, which I had always found to be one of the more reliable things about birds. I went downstairs and stood at the kitchen counter and looked at the coffee maker. Then I reached up and got one mug out of the cabinet, just one. No hesitation. No second mug placed and then reconsidered. Just one set on the counter filled when the coffee finished brewing. I stood at the window drinking it and looked at the backyard. The oak tree Beverly had always wanted me to take down was moving gently in the morning breeze, its shadow making slow patterns on the grass. I thought about the oak tree that had come down on Elmwood Drive and the one still standing in my yard, and about how much of life is just the difference between the tree that falls and the tree that doesn't. My phone rang at 8:45. Senator Harrison's office number. This time a staff member, crisp and efficient, who introduced herself as Carolyn and walked me through the preliminary terms of a contract services agreement with the Tennessee General Assembly's Transportation Committee. Independent technical consultant, 60-day initial term renewable. The work would involve reviewing active inspection backlogs at 12 bridge sites across the state, starting with 3 in the Nashville metro area. Senator Harrison wanted me to emphasize, Carolyn said, that this is a technical engagement, not a ceremonial one. He's not looking for a ribbon cutter. He's looking for someone who reads a structure the way you read the one yesterday. Tell the senator that's the only way I know how to read them, I said. I'll pass that along. We'll have the formal paperwork to you by Wednesday. I set the phone down and finished my coffee looking out the window. At 10:15, someone knocked on the front door. Janet Kowalski stood on my porch with a covered dish and the expression of a woman who has decided that some situations require casserole and further argument is pointless. She was wearing her Saturday gardening clothes, even though it was Monday, which on Janet meant she had come directly from her garden specifically to check on me, and hadn't wanted to waste time changing. "You look terrible," she said warmly, handing me the dish. "I feel fine." "You look terrible, and you feel fine, which means you're a man." She stepped inside without being invited, which was her standard operating procedure, and went directly to the kitchen to put the kettle on. "Sit down before you fall down. I saw the Channel 4 report this morning. Both of them, the bridge and the house." I sat at the kitchen table. The casserole smelled like the kind of thing that required actual effort to make, the kind with layers. "Janet, you didn't have to. I made it last night while the storm was going," she said from the kitchen. "I had a feeling you were going to be busy and wouldn't eat properly." She appeared in the doorway. Was I wrong? I thought about the last thing I'd eaten, which had been the eggs and bacon at the diner on Sunday morning, before any of it had happened. That felt like it belonged to a different week entirely. "No," I said. "You weren't wrong." She sat across from me and poured tea for both of us without asking whether I wanted any, and we sat in the particular comfortable quiet of two people who have known each other long enough that silence doesn't require explanation. Emily's text came in at 11:30. "Dad, I don't know what to say. I've been sitting here trying to figure out what to say, and I don't have it yet. But I wanted you to know I'm thinking about it." A pause. Then, "How's your arm?" I read it twice. Set the phone down on the table. Picked up my tea. "Good news or complicated news?" Janet asked, reading my face the way she'd gotten good at over 4 years of proximity. "Good news," I said. "Just slow." Janet nodded like that made complete sense, which it did. At 12:40, a text came in from a number I didn't have saved. "Hi, Mr. Paul, this is Marcus. Emily gave me your number. I hope that's okay. I wanted to say thank you for coming last night. My dad told me what you did with the cables and the jack. Can I ask you something? How did you know which cable angle to use?" I stared at that message for a long time. 12 years old. Plaster dust in his hair and tears on his face 6 hours ago, and now he wanted to know about cable angles. Something shifted in my chest, not the tight, compressed feeling that had lived there for most of the past 24 hours, but something that moved in the other direction entirely. Something that opened rather than closed. I set the phone on the table and looked out the kitchen window at the oak tree in my backyard, still standing, its shadow still moving on the grass. Then I picked the phone back up and started typing. "Marcus, you can always ask. Here's how cable angle works when you're dealing with a compromised load-bearing structure." I wrote 3 paragraphs. Sent them. Put the phone down. Janet was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Kid who was stuck in the house last night," I said. "Wants to know about structural cable rigging." Janet's face did something complicated, and then settled into a smile that reached all the way up into her eyes. "Well," she said, wrapping both hands around her tea mug. "Sounds like you've got somewhere to be." I looked at the single coffee mug still sitting on the counter from this morning. "Yeah," I said. "I think I do." Before I tell you what Clinton Webb said when no one else was in the room, drop 305 in the comments if you're still watching. What he admitted that morning, face to face with Paul, with no cameras and no audience. That's the moment this story turned for me. Please note, portions of this story include fictional elements added for depth and educational purposes. If you'd prefer content without those elements, this is a natural place to pause, and I'll be here whenever you return. I was on my second cup of coffee at a corner table in Tanner's when Clinton Webb walked through the door. Tanner's Diner on Millbrook Pike, the kind of place that has been serving the same breakfast menu since 1987 and doesn't apologize for it. Vinyl booths the color of old mustard coffee that arrived in a ceramic mug before you asked for it. A pie case up front that rotated between 4 varieties, depending on what Del Tanner felt like making that week. I came here on Tuesday and Thursday mornings when I didn't have anywhere specific to be. The staff knew my order. Nobody bothered me. Clinton stood in the doorway for a moment, scanning the room. He'd dressed down by his standards, dark chinos, a button-down with no tie, no blazer. He still looked like money, some things you can't dress out of. But the careful ease he usually carried himself with, that particular posture of a man who has never doubted his right to occupy any room he walked into, that was different this morning. Something in the set of his shoulders was working harder than usual. He saw me, walked over without hesitating. He didn't extend his hand when he reached the table. He just pulled out the chair across from me and sat down. "I figured you'd be here," he said. "How'd you figure that?" "Marcus told me you said he could email you. I asked him where you usually had coffee." A corner of his mouth moved. He'd already asked Emily. A waitress appeared. Clinton ordered coffee black. She refilled mine without being asked and left us to it. For a moment, neither of us reached for our cups. Clinton looked at the table, then up at me. He had the look of a man who has rehearsed something and arrived at the location where the rehearsal was supposed to happen, and realized that what he'd prepared wasn't going to work the way he'd planned. "I'm not good at this," he said. "At what?" "At—" He stopped, pressed his lips together. "At being in a situation where money doesn't fix the problem." I waited. "I've been trying to build something with Beverly's family for 3 years," he said. His voice had lost the polished register it usually operated in. What was underneath was flatter, more Midwestern. The voice of whoever he'd been before, Nashville and investment portfolios and bespoke blazers. "I thought if I gave Emily enough, included her enough, made the right gestures, I thought that was how you became part of a family." He picked up his coffee mug, turned it in his hands without drinking. "I didn't think about what I was replacing. Or who." I looked at him steadily. "Clinton." "I told Emily not to invite you," he said. The words landed on the table between us like something set down carefully rather than thrown. "It wasn't Beverly," he continued. "It was me. I told her it would be cleaner if you weren't there, that it would help things feel more settled, like a real family." His jaw tightened. "Like I was a real father." The diner moved around us, dishes clattering, someone's kid laughing, 2 booths over, Del Tanner arguing good-naturedly with a regular about the Tennessee Titans' offensive line. Life doing what it does. I kept my eyes on Clinton. I dropped the rope," he said. 3 words. Quiet. No performance behind them. "I know," I said. Something crossed his face, not relief, exactly, more like the specific discomfort of a man who has been carrying a thing he expected to be heavier once he set it down, and found it was exactly as heavy as he thought. "Emily grabbed it," he said. "I know that too." He looked at me for a moment. "You saw." "I saw." Clinton set his mug down. He looked out the window at Millbrook Pike, at the Tuesday morning traffic moving past, ordinary and indifferent. His throat moved as he swallowed. "What do I do with that?" he said. His voice had dropped to something that wasn't quite steady. "My 12-year-old kid was trapped in a hallway calling for me, and I was standing in the rain, holding a rope. I couldn't hold, and your daughter ran out and held it instead." He turned back to me, and his eyes were red at the corners, the particular redness that comes from a night of not enough sleep, and too much of what sleep was supposed to protect you from. What does a man do with that?" I thought about a lot of things in the pause that followed. I thought about Marcus asking about cable angles at 12:40 on a Monday afternoon. I thought about what it had felt like to hold the back of that boy's head in the dark hallway while he shook against my chest. I thought about 40 years of doing difficult work, and the particular truth that experience had taught me above all others that the most important question in any structural failure isn't who's to blame for what gave way. It's whether what's left can hold what it needs to hold going forward. You start by not dropping it next time, I said. Clinton looked at me. That's it, he said. That's the whole thing, I said. There's no speech that fixes it. There's no gesture that undoes it. You just make a different decision next time a rope needs holding, and the time after that. And you do that long enough that Marcus grows up knowing his father is someone who shows up when it counts. I picked up my coffee. That's all fatherhood ever was. It's just showing up and not letting go. Clinton's chin dropped toward his chest. His shoulders came forward. He pressed the heel of his hand against his forehead and held it there, and a sound came out of him, controlled, suppressed, but real. The sound of a man absorbing something that has hit him somewhere he didn't know he was exposed. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He didn't try to hide it. Is Marcus going to be okay? He asked. The question came out stripped of everything else, no positioning, no management. Just a father asking. Talk to your kid, I said. He's tougher than you think, and he knows more than you realize. Start there. Clinton nodded. He wrapped both hands around his mug and stared at the table. After a moment, I said, How's he doing with the email? Something shifted in Clinton's face, not quite a smile, but the territory just adjacent to one. He sent you 4 questions last night. I know, I said. I answered them. Clinton looked at me with an expression I couldn't entirely read. It had several things in it that didn't usually share the same face: gratitude and embarrassment, and something that might have been the beginning of respect, the earned kind, the kind that doesn't come with a price tag. He picked up his coffee and drank. We sat there for a while after that, the two of us at a corner table in Tanner's Diner on a Tuesday morning, the pie case rotating its 4 varieties up front, Del Tanner, still arguing about the Titans, the coffee arriving in its ceramic mug without anyone asking. Clinton left first. He stopped at the counter to pay for both coffees before I could say anything about it. At the door, he turned back. Paul. I looked up. He held my gaze for a moment. Thank you, he said, for all of it. I nodded once. He walked out into the Tuesday morning. I sat with my 3rd cup of coffee and looked out the window at Millbrook Pike, and I thought about rope and about cable angles and about the particular patience required to build something that was meant to last. The Tennessee State Capitol building sits on a hill above downtown Nashville, the way capitals tend to sit deliberately elevated, as if the architecture itself is making an argument about the relationship between government and the people being governed. I had driven past it 100 times over the years without ever having reason to go inside. I parked in the visitor lot on Charlotte Avenue, walked up the hill in the July heat, and went through security with my laptop bag and a USB drive containing 47 slides of structural analysis that Dale and I had spent 3 evenings preparing. The security officer checked my ID, handed back my bag, and pointed me toward the east wing. I was wearing a blue button-down shirt pressed, and the same steel-toed boots I'd worn to every job site for the better part of 2 decades. I had considered a tie for approximately 45 seconds that morning, before hanging it back in the closet. I wasn't appearing before this committee as a guest at a fundraising dinner. I was appearing as an engineer, and engineers dress for the work. The committee room was smaller than I expected. Loom conference table, maybe 30 feet, state seals on the walls, a raised dais at the far end, where 7 committee members sat behind nameplates. Public gallery along the sidewall, maybe 40 people, staff, lobbyists, a row of reporters, and in the back corner 3 television cameras that I noted and then deliberately stopped thinking about. Senator Harrison sat at the center of the dais. He looked different than he had on the bridge, composed, formal, the version of himself that this room required. When I walked in, his eyes found mine immediately, and he gave me the small, precise nod of a man who has been waiting for this particular morning for 4 weeks. Dale was already seated at the witness table. When I arrived, his inspection files stacked in front of him, in the careful order of a man who has been over them so many times he could recite them from memory. He looked up when I sat down beside him. The skin under his eyes was dark. He hadn't been sleeping well since June 15th, and I suspected he wouldn't until today was over. "How are you holding up?" I asked him quietly, his hands resting on the files pressed flat for a moment. "Ask me in 2 hours," he said. Harrison called the committee to order at 9 o'clock precisely. "This committee has convened an expedited hearing," he said, "to examine the circumstances surrounding the structural failure at the Riverstone Bridge. Temporary support framework on June 15th of this year, and specifically to review the handling of an inspection report filed with the TDOT District 4 office on May 27th. He looked at the TDOT representative, a man in his 50s in a gray suit, who had the expression of someone who had known this day was coming and had not been able to outrun it. "We'll begin with the inspection report itself, Mr. Hutchins." Dale testified for 40 minutes. I was precise. He was thorough. He walked the committee through every line of the May 27th report. The diagonal brace displacement, the cable tension readings, the crack propagation pattern at the main connection joint, and then he walked them through the TDOT District 4 response, which had classified the report as non-urgent, pending the September budget allocation cycle, based on an internal cost-benefit assessment that had weighed the repair cost against the probability of failure within the current construction timeline. The probability assessment, Dale explained in a voice that stayed level through what I knew was considerable effort, had been 17% over a 90-day period. One of the committee members leaned forward. "Mr. Hutchins, you filed this report on May 27th. The failure occurred on June 15th. That's 19 days. "Yes, ma'am," Dale said. "So the failure occurred within the 90-day window your report identified as the risk period?" "Yes, ma'am, it did." The room had a particular quality of attention by the time I was called to the witness table, the kind that happens when a room full of people has just finished absorbing something uncomfortable and is waiting to understand exactly how uncomfortable it should feel. Harrison introduced me as a licensed structural engineer with 40 years of field experience, currently engaged as an independent technical consultant to the committee. He was careful, as he'd promised he would be, not to mention June 15th or the bridge or any of what had happened there. Not yet. That wasn't why I was here. I was here because I could explain what the report meant. I walked through the slides. I explained what a diagonal brace displacement meant in the context of temporary support rigging, how a half-inch shift in bearing position changed the load path through the entire framework, how that changed load path increased stress concentrations at the connection joints, how increased stress concentrations accelerated crack propagation in concrete that was already at the end of its design service life. I used no jargon that I didn't immediately define. I watched the committee members' faces and slowed down when I saw confusion and sped up when I saw comprehension. I had spent 40 years explaining structural problems to people who weren't engineers, and I knew what it looked like when a room was following and what it looked like when a room was lost. This room followed. The TDOT representative offered his agency's explanation, budget constraints, competing priorities, the volume of inspection reports filed across the district, the standard classification criteria that had been applied consistently. Harrison let him finish, then he turned to me. Mr. Logan, he said, in your professional judgment, taking everything you've heard this morning, the inspection report, the classification decision. The timeline was the failure at Riverstone Bridge on June 15th, preventable. The room went very still. I thought about the right way to answer that question, for exactly the amount of time the question deserved, which was not very long. Yes, I said. 3 weeks before it happened. A crew of 4 with the correct equipment and a repair order could have secured that brace in a single working day. The window existed. The information existed. The decision not to act within that window was made by people in this process who had the authority to make a different decision. I paused. 17 lives were on that bus, I said. 3 people were in the vehicle that went into the river. All of them went home that day. That outcome was not guaranteed by the system. It was the result of circumstances that had nothing to do with the system working the way it was supposed to work. The room held what I'd said for a moment. The TDOT representative's pen had stopped moving on the notepad in front of him. 2 of the committee members were writing. One was not writing and was looking at the table with the expression of a person doing arithmetic they don't want to finish. Harrison thanked me. Dale and I walked out of the Capitol building together at 11:40 down the hill on Charlotte Avenue in the July heat, neither of us saying much. At the bottom of the hill, Dale stopped and put his hand out. I shook it. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was rough. I know the last month has been." He stopped, pressed his lips together hard, got himself back. "Thank you. You filed the report," I said. "You did your job. The system failed, not you." Dale nodded. His jaw worked for a moment. "I keep thinking about that bus," he said quietly. "I keep thinking about those 37 people." "I know," I said. "Me too." We stood there on the sidewalk in the heat for a moment, 2 engineers who had spent their careers trying to make sure structures held standing in the aftermath of one that hadn't. And then Dale's phone rang, and he answered it, and I walked to my truck. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before starting the engine. The July sun turning the cab into a greenhouse, the Nashville skyline rising above the tree line to the east. 40 years. 40 years of reading structures, filing reports, making calls at 2 in the morning when something wasn't right, showing up to places where things had gone wrong and trying to make them less wrong. Today, for the first time, somebody had asked me to explain all of it out loud in a room where the answer could change something. I started the truck. Outside the Capitol, a news van was setting up a live position. I drove past it without stopping. I was in the garage on a Thursday afternoon, 3 days after the hearing, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. I didn't recognize it immediately, a white Volvo sedan, not the BMW SUV Beverly usually drove. She must have rented it while her car was in for service, or maybe she'd traded up, or maybe there were things about Beverly Webb's daily life that I simply didn't know anymore and hadn't known for a while. That was how it worked after a certain number of years. You stopped being the person someone called with the ordinary updates. She got out of the car and stood for a moment at the end of the driveway, looking at the garage, looking at the truck, looking at the tool wall with its organized rows of wrenches and sockets, and the hydraulic jack back in its bracket, and the cables coiled and hung exactly where they lived when they weren't needed. I set down the socket wrench I'd been using on the truck's rear brake assembly and straightened up. "Beverly." She walked toward the garage slowly. She was dressed simply, slacks, a light blue blouse, flat shoes. No jewelry except her wedding ring. Her hair was the same as it had always been, the same pale brown she'd had since I'd met her at a structural engineering conference in Memphis in 1987. Though there was more silver in it now than there used to be. She looked at the garage. The way you look at a place you haven't been in a long time, recognizing everything and finding it slightly changed at the same time. I should have called, she said. You don't have to call, I said. You can just come. Something moved across her face at that. She pulled the wooden stool from beside my workbench and sat down, which meant she hadn't come for a short conversation. Beverly Webb did not perch on garage stools for brief exchanges. I leaned against the truck and waited. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you, she said, since that night. She looked at her hands in her lap. Her fingers were laced together, pressing against each other in the way they did when she was working through something complicated. I've written it out 3 times, thrown it away 3 times. You don't have to have it figured out, I said. Yes, I do. She looked up. That's the thing about you, Paul. You've always been willing to accept less than what you were owed, because you didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable by asking for what was right. And I took advantage of that for a long time. We all did. Her voice was steady, but her chin was doing the thing it did, a small controlled tremor that she'd always hated about herself and tried to suppress. And I let Emily learn to do it too, and that's the part I can't. She stopped, pressed her lips together. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. The night of the storm, when I was under that ceiling section in the dark, and I could hear the roof moving, and I didn't know if it was going to hold. She swallowed. The first thing I thought was that if I called for help, it would be you who came. And then I thought, why would he come after everything? Her eyes filled and she let them, not making any effort to stop it. Tears ran down her face in 2 slow lines, and she didn't wipe them. And then the door opened. And it was you. Her voice cracked on the last word fully, and she pressed her hand flat against her mouth for a moment before she could continue. Of course it was you, of course. My chest was tight. I reached for something to do with my hands and found the socket wrench still in my palm and set it down carefully on the workbench. Beverly, I'm not asking for anything, she said quickly. I'm not here to ask you for anything. I know what we are now, and I'm not confused about it. She met my eyes. I just needed you to know that I understand now what I didn't understand when we were married, what I was too busy wanting something different to see. Her voice had gone very quiet. You were always going to show up, for all of us, no matter what we did. And I spent a lot of years treating that like it was just how things were, instead of understanding that it was a choice you made. Every time, a choice. The garage was quiet, except for the afternoon birds outside, and the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. I looked at this woman I had been married to for 29 years, at the lines around her eyes that hadn't been there when we met in Memphis, at the way she was sitting on that stool, not the composed, socially managed Beverly, who had learned to move through Clinton Webb's professional world, but someone older and more honest than that version. The Beverly who used to sit on the tailgate of my first truck, the one before the F-250, eating gas station sandwiches on job sites, because she wanted to see what I was building. I pushed off the truck. I went to the coffee maker on the workbench shelf, the small one I kept out there, the one that had produced about 40,000 cups of coffee over the years while I worked, and I filled it and switched it on. Got 2 mugs down from the shelf above it. 2 mugs. No hesitation. No reconsidering. Beverly watched me do it. Something shifted in her expression, recognition, and then the particular kind of emotion that comes when a small gesture lands in exactly the right place. Paul, she said softly. Coffee takes about 4 minutes, I said. You can stay for coffee. Her chin trembled again, harder this time. She pressed both hands flat on her thighs and looked at the garage floor and pulled herself back together by what appeared to be sheer force of character. When she looked up, her eyes were still, but there was something steadier underneath them. "Okay," she said. "I'll stay for coffee." We sat in the two work chairs at the back of the garage while the coffee brewed, and for a while we didn't talk. And it was the kind of not talking that has content in it, rather than the kind that's waiting for someone to say something. The afternoon light came in sideways through the garage door and put long shadows across the concrete floor. After a while, Beverly said, "I heard Dale Hutchins testified at the hearing." "He did. He was good." "How did it go?" "The way it needed to go." I poured 2 cups and handed her one. TDOT's going to have to revise their classification criteria for structural inspection reports. Harrison's committee is drafting the language. Beverly wrapped both hands around the mug. "You're going to be one of the people who reviews that language, aren't you?" It wasn't a question. She still knew me well enough for that. "Probably," I said. She almost smiled. It reached the corner of her mouth and stayed there. "Good," she said quietly. "That's good, Paul." We drank our coffee in the garage on a Thursday afternoon in late July, 2 people who had built something together for a long time and taken it apart and were figuring out maybe what the pieces were good for now. My phone buzzed on the workbench. "Emily." I looked at Beverly. She nodded at the phone. "Go ahead." I picked it up and answered on the second ring. "Hey," I said. "Dad." Emily's voice was different than it had been in June. Quieter. More careful in the way that careful can mean someone is taking something seriously rather than avoiding it. "Are you busy?" "I've got a few minutes," I said. "What's on your mind?" I wore the blue button-down again. Same shirt as the hearing. Same boots. Janet noticed when she met me outside the hall and said nothing about it, which was her particular way of approving. The ceremony was held in the Schermerhorn Symphony Center on 4th Avenue, a Thursday evening in early August, 3 weeks after the hearing closed, in a venue that felt larger than the occasion required, which I mentioned to Harrison when he found me in the lobby beforehand. He said the city had insisted, and he hadn't wanted to argue about it. I told him that sounded about right for the government. The hall seated 400. It was close to full. Janet had saved me a seat in the second row, but I asked her to keep it and stood at the side of the stage, instead, where I could see the room without being looked at quite so directly. 37 passengers from the charter bus had been invited. Most of them came. They sat together in a block near the center of the hall, and when I walked past that section to get to the stage steps, a woman in a yellow dress grabbed my hand with both of hers and held it for a moment without saying anything. Her eyes full, her grip tight enough that I felt it in the stitches on my forearm. I squeezed back. That was enough. Harrison spoke first. He introduced me as a structural engineer, not a hero, which was exactly what I'd asked him to do. Captain Odom spoke second, direct, specific, the numbers stated plainly. 2 lives at this bridge, 3 at the house on Elmwood Drive, 5 total. He didn't editorialize. He didn't need to. I accepted the citation and said a few words that I won't repeat here because they weren't particularly memorable, and I was mostly focused on not looking at the cameras. I sat back down. That was when the side door opened. Marcus came through it alone. I was wearing a collared shirt and dark slacks that were slightly too long for him and had clearly been purchased for the occasion. His hair was combed back with the particular effort of a 12-year-old who has tried very hard to look older than he is. In his right hand he was holding a folded piece of paper. A woman from the organizing committee appeared at the edge of the stage, looking uncertain. Marcus had apparently spoken to her predecessor, and the shift change had created a small administrative gap in the communication chain. She looked at Harrison. Harrison looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the microphone. Harrison gave the smallest nod I've ever seen constitute a decision. Marcus walked to the microphone. He unfolded his paper with hands that were shaking, not from fear, I thought, but from the specific trembling that comes when a person is feeling something too large for their body to contain quietly. He smoothed it flat on the podium. He looked out at the hall. Then he read, "My dad has money. Mr. Paul has something else." I didn't know what it was called until that night in the hallway, when the ceiling was coming down, and I was scared, and I kept calling for somebody, and then I heard his voice. He paused. His jaw tightened the way his father's did when Clinton was fighting to hold something in. I know what it's called now. It's called showing up. He folded the paper. He walked off the stage. The hall was absolutely still for 3 full seconds. Then it wasn't. The sound that came up from 400 people wasn't the polite applause of a civic ceremony. It was something rawer than that, sustained and genuine, the sound of people who had been moved past the place where composed appreciation lives and into something that they felt in their chests rather than processed in their heads. I was looking at my hands in my lap when I felt a presence stop beside me. Marcus. He had come directly to me from the stage steps. He stood at my left side and looked at me with those dark eyes of his, red-rimmed, now the paper clenched in his fist, and he said very quietly, so only I could hear it over the applause, "I practiced it 14 times. Something broke open in my chest that I hadn't given permission to break. "I know," I said. My voice came out rough around the edges. "You did good, Marcus." He sat down in the empty chair beside me and faced forward, and after a moment his shoulder came to rest against my arm, just lightly, the way a kid leans into someone when they've decided that person is safe. I let him. In the back row, Emily had both hands pressed over her mouth. Her shoulders were shaking. She wasn't trying to stop it anymore. Beverly had her head turned slightly away, blinking fast. Her hand was in Clinton's. Clinton was looking at his son with an expression I had no word for, something between pride and grief, and the kind of gratitude that doesn't know where to put itself. He wasn't looking at anyone else, just Marcus. That was enough. Janet caught my eye from the second row and gave me a look that said everything she would have said if we'd been sitting at her kitchen table instead of in a symphony hall with 400 people around us. I gave her a small nod back. The applause was still going. The hall was still emptying when Emily found me. I was standing near the side exit, citation in one hand, jacket over my other arm, watching the crowd thin out. Marcus had gone back to Clinton and Beverly 10 minutes earlier after sitting beside me long enough that his collar had wilted and he'd stopped trying to look older than 12. I'd watched him walk back across the hall, and I'd watched Clinton put his hand on the back of his son's neck when he reached them, and that had been enough of that for me to look at for one afternoon. Emily came through this crowd without hurrying. She wasn't performing anything. No prepared expression, no careful composure. She looked tired in the way people look tired when they've been carrying something heavy for long enough that the weight has become their normal, and they've forgotten what it felt like to put it down. She stopped in front of me. "Dad," she said. "Hey, Em." She looked at the citation in my hand, then at my face. Her eyes were still swollen from the haul. The cut on her palm from the rope, mostly healed now, just a pale line across the base of her fingers, caught the light when she pushed her hair back. "I don't know how to start," she said. "Then don't start. Just say what you came to say." She exhaled. "I turned you into someone I only called when things broke." Her voice was quiet and direct, the voice of someone who has rehearsed a thing enough times that the emotion has been worn down to the essential truth underneath it. I didn't do it on purpose, but I did it. And I don't know how to fix that, and I'm not going to pretend I do. I looked at my daughter, 31 years old, standing in the emptying lobby of a symphony hall in Nashville, with a heeled rope burn on her palm, and her eyes still red, and her voice steadier than I expected it to be. I thought about a lot of things. I thought about the 6-year-old at the county fair. I thought about the phone call in the garage 3 days before Father's Day, and the 2 mugs on the kitchen counter, and the single mug that had replaced them. I thought about the rope and the rain, and the fact that when it had mattered, when the structure was coming down, and something needed holding, Emily had been the one who held it. "Are you hungry?" I said. She blinked. "What?" "There's a diner about 2 blocks from here. They have decent pie." I put my jacket on. "Walk with me." She stared at me for a moment. Then something in her face shifted, not relief, not quite, but the specific expression of a person who has braced for a difficult conversation and been handed something ordinary instead, and found that the ordinary thing was exactly what they needed. "Okay," she said. "Yeah, okay." We walked out of the Schermerhorn into the July evening. Nashville hummed around us, traffic on 4th Avenue music, drifting from somewhere on Broadway 3 blocks south, the air thick and warm and smelling of summer asphalt and someone's barbecue on the wind. The diner was called Ruby's. Red vinyl booths, a counter with spinning stools, a chalkboard above the pie case. The kind of place that has been fed by the city for 40 years and feeds the city right back. We slid into a booth. A waitress appeared, poured water, recited the pie options. Emily ordered cherry. I ordered pecan. We asked for coffee. For a while we just sat with it. Emily looked at the table. Then she looked up. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Did you know that night in the hallway with Marcus? Did you know I was holding the rope? I saw you through the window." Her throat moved. "You didn't say anything." "It wasn't mine to say anything about," I said. "You made a decision. That was yours." Her eyes filled again, but she blinked it back this time, not hiding it, just choosing not to follow it down. "I grabbed it because I was terrified it was going to cost you your life." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "I wasn't trying to prove anything. I couldn't let go." "I know," I said. "That's why it mattered." The coffee arrived. Emily wrapped both hands around her mug. "Dad," she said, "I don't want to be the person you only hear from when the roof falls in." I looked at her across the table. This person I had known since before she had words, since before she could hold her own head up, since before she had any way of knowing what it would cost either of us to sit in this booth and have this conversation. "Then don't be," I said. 2 words. No conditions attached. No list of requirements, no map of what it needed to look like. Just the door open. She pressed her lips together. Nodded. We ate our pie. We drank our coffee. We talked about her, about the bridges I'd been contracted to inspect, about Marcus's increasingly detailed emails on structural engineering. Emily laughed once, a real one, unguarded, over something I said about a cable specification question Marcus had sent me at 11:30 at night, with 3 follow-up questions before I'd finished answering the first. When the check came, I reached for it. Emily reached for her bag. "Dad, I've got it." She didn't argue, but when we stood up to leave, she picked up my jacket from the seat beside me and held it while I put it on. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing. We walked out into the Nashville night together, and for the first time in longer than I could accurately measure, I wasn't counting the distance between us. 3 months later, I was standing on the Johnson County Bridge at 7 in the morning, with a clipboard and a flashlight, and a thermos of coffee, doing what I had spent 40 years doing. The bridge carried Route 67 over a tributary of the Doe River, northeast Tennessee, built in 1974 and last formally inspected in 2019. According to the backlog list Harrison's committee had compiled, it had been flagged for follow-up 3 times in the intervening years. The follow-up had not occurred. I worked through the inspection checklist, methodically bearing plates, expansion joints, substructure, condition drainage. The morning was cool for September, the kind of cool that arrives in the Tennessee mountains before it reaches Nashville, and the river below the bridge was running clear over the limestone bed. A hawk was working the tree line on the far bank. The whole world smelled like wet leaves and cold water, and the particular clean emptiness of early morning in a place that hasn't been disturbed yet. I found 2 items that needed attention. Neither was urgent. Both were documented, photographed, and added to the report that would go to TDOT under the new classification criteria the committee had finalized in August. Under the new criteria, both items would generate a response within 30 days. I drove back to Nashville with the windows down. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I had coffee at Tanner's. Del Tanner had started keeping a slice of pecan pie behind the counter on those mornings which he denied doing deliberately and which appeared without fail. I didn't argue about it. Janet and I had breakfast at the diner on Maple Grove on Wednesday mornings. She ordered the same thing every week, 2 eggs over easy wheat toast, orange juice, and spent 45 minutes telling me about her garden and her book club and the ongoing saga of the Hendersons 3 doors down. And I drank my coffee and listened and found that I looked forward to it in a way I hadn't looked forward to a Wednesday morning in longer than I could remember. Emily called on Sunday evenings. Not every Sunday, most Sundays. Sometimes she called on a Tuesday instead if something had come up she wanted to talk about. Once she called on a Thursday morning from a work trip in Memphis, and we talked for 40 minutes about nothing in particular while she waited for her flight. I answered every time. Marcus's emails had evolved. What had started as questions about cable angles and load distribution had become over 3 months something closer to a curriculum. He was reading textbooks, real ones, not simplified versions. He'd started asking about material science, about the difference between tensile and compressive strength, about why concrete needed steel reinforcement to do what neither material could do alone. I answered every question, sometimes in a paragraph, sometimes in 3 pages with diagrams I sketched on graph paper and photographed with my phone. His last email had ended with, "I think I want to be a structural engineer. Is that weird to tell you?" I'd written back, "It's not weird. It's a good job for someone who pays attention. You pay attention." He'd replied 12 minutes later with 4 more questions. On a Friday evening in late September, I came home to find the F-250 needed an oil change I'd been putting off for 2 weeks. I pulled it into the garage, changed into my work clothes, and got underneath. The garage was quiet. The September evening was coming in through the open door in long, cooling waves. Somewhere down Millbrook Lane, someone was grilling something that smelled like it had been marinating since morning. I worked through the oil change methodically, the way I worked through everything 1 step at a time in the right order without skipping anything that mattered. When I rolled out from underneath and stood up, I looked at the truck. The bed was the same as it had always been. Cables coiled and secured. Hydraulic jack in its bracket. Reciprocating saw. Bolt cutters. Reflective vest folded on top of the first aid kit. 40 years of habit. Except it wasn't habit anymore. That was the thing I had come to understand over the 3 months since June 15th. It had never really been habit. Habit is something you do without thinking. This was something else, a decision made again every morning when I loaded those cables and that jack and drove out into whatever the day was going to ask of me. The decision to be ready. The decision to show up. I wiped my hands on the shop rag, put the tools away, turned off the garage light. Inside my phone showed a text from Emily, sent 20 minutes ago, a photograph of the view from her apartment window, Nashville, at dusk, no caption. Just the image. Just here is what I'm looking at, and I thought of you. I looked at it for a moment. Then I set the phone down on the kitchen counter, poured a cup of coffee, and went out to the porch to watch the September evening come in. The F-250 sat in the open garage behind me ready. It always would be. I spent 65 years thinking that showing up was simply what fathers do. I was wrong. It is a choice made again every single morning. If God placed me on that bridge alone on Father's Day, with a truck full of tools and nowhere to be, then I have stopped questioning the route and started being grateful for the destination. Don't do what I did. Don't spend years knocking on a door that only opens when something breaks. Don't allow the people you love to treat your presence like a backup option. Family stories don't fall apart loudly, they unravel quietly, with one unanswered call, one holiday table. You weren't invited to one door that only opens when something breaks. I am not a hero. I am an engineer who learned too late that the most important structure you will ever maintain is the one between yourself and the people who are supposed to love you. Family drama does not announce itself. The distance grows quietly until the distance becomes the relationship itself. Set the standard early. Hold the rope. And if someone keeps letting go, that tells you everything. Family stories like this one belong to all of us in some form. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below and tell me which moment hit hardest. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe so you never miss the next story. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means everything. These stories contain fictional elements crafted for reflection and education. If this content isn't right for you right now, step away, find what serves you better, and know this door is always open when you're ready.